Welcome to Unit 5, and we're going to get a little further into modal logic today. We'll start with the homework problems, translations, and then the valid proofs, and then we'll get into the invalid arguments and refutations. Okay, so the trickiest part of the translations is the ambiguous ones, and there's two forms that are ambiguous, and you gotta say not the English means this, but it means this or that. And when you get arguments using this, you have to say could mean two things, this or that. Usually the arguments are of some big philosophical importance, but a little confusing, and they seem right, but they're not. And the problem is the ambiguity. We'll see that later. So which forms are ambiguous? If A, then it's necessary, or must be, that B. So you have an if, then, and in the second part you have a necessary or a must, a strong modal operator. So if A, then it must be that B, or it's necessary that B, and that could mean box inside or box outside. So it could mean that it's if A, then B is inherently necessary. It could mean it's necessary that if A, then B. And then the second ambiguous form is kind of related. It's an if-then, except in the second part you have impossible or can't be. And then again you have box inside or outside. It could mean either of these. And the first one, the box inside, you could also say not possible instead of necessarily false, that it really comes to the same thing. Okay, so those forms are ambiguous. Which are clearly not ambiguous? Well, these forms here. If A, then B by itself is necessary, then by itself means just the second part. Or if A, then B is inherently necessary, again, just means that the second part is necessary. And these are all box outside. A entails B is a necessary if A, then B. And necessarily if A, then B, if the necessary goes first, then you're ascribing necessity to the whole if then. And the same thing here, and the same thing here. If A then B, an unbreakable deal is said to be necessary. So you put necessary on the inside, and then the outside. So you don't want to just say they're all ambiguous. That's wrong. And this is kind of subtle. We'll see more why this is important a little bit later, like next unit, when we see some examples on that, or maybe the unit afterwards. Okay, so here are some translations, and what do these look like? There's rain is a contingent statement. It means that it could be that it's true and could be that it's false. It's possible either way. Now, if you say it's possible, you're saying it's true in some possible world. It could also be necessary. What's necessary is also possible, true in at least one possible world. So there's we logicians are very sharp on the distinction between contingent and possible. Possible is just the diamond. Contingent statement said could be true, could be false. Contingent truth says in addition that it's true. So it's true that are, but it might have been that not are. And there you go. So contingent truth says it's true, but might have been false. This is the box in outside one. It's necessary that if there's rain, then there's evil. And this one is if there's rain, then evil by itself is logically necessary. And the by itself indicates that it's just the second part. So if there's rain, then it's inherently necessary in itself that there's evil. Kind of a silly idea, but we're just translating. We're not worried about that. Then this one is ambiguous. If then, where the then has a strong modal operator. So it could mean it's necessary if there's if there's rain, then there's rain, which is kind of trivial. Every if then is necessary. If A, then A is necessary. Or it could mean it's if there's rain at all, then rain is inherently necessary. Rain doesn't happen by chance. If it happens, then it's inherently necessary. Okay, we'll see this more when we get into the English examples of arguments. Okay, so we started into the modal proofs last time. They're a little tricky at first. Students are sometimes a little confused at first, and then all of a sudden it clicks with what it's about. So, how do you do a modal proof? Well, kind of like before, you assume the opposite, and you derive everything you can, and the hopes to get a contradiction or a refutation. And there's 4 specific modal inference rules, and you got to use them in a certain order. You got to use these first, and then this one last. Okay, so first of all, you want to reverse squiggles. Not necessary A gives you possible not A. What's not necessary could be false, and what's not possible is necessarily false. These have the same meaning. Not necessary, possible, not possible, therefore necessarily false. But moving the box or diamond to the outside helps you along with the proof, because then you can, this one helps you to move the box or diamond to the outside, whereas then you can drop them using these inference rules. So you want to use these whenever you can. Not necessary A, therefore possible not A. Not possible A, therefore necessary not A. And then you can start the step, henceforth forget it, and only use these if the whole formula begins not necessary or not possible. The rest of it could be longer, but the formula has to begin not possible, not necessary. And then the second thing you do is drop diamonds and use a new world each time. So you say it's possible that A, therefore A is true in a possible world, and you just give it a name, W. It's got to be a new name that you haven't used before. And you use W for your first name, WW for your second name, and so forth. So when you drop diamonds, use a new world. And lastly, drop boxes, and you want to use the old worlds if you have them, and if not, you go into a new world. So necessary A, and you don't start this because you might have to use it more than once if you have various worlds, and if they come up later and whatever. So reverse squiggles first, and drop diamonds, and lastly, drop boxes. And there you go. This was our sample that we did last time. It's necessary that if A then B, and therefore, it's possible that A and B, therefore it's possible that A. That's valid. How do you do the proof? Well, you assume the opposite of what you want to prove, first of all. That's sort of like always. So you want to prove possible A, so you assume not possible A. Okay. And then you, reverse squiggles. Not possible, therefore necessarily not. That's reverse squiggles. That's this one. You want to do that right away whenever you can. Not possible, therefore necessarily false. And then you drop the diamonds into a new world. So possible A and B, therefore a new world. We call it W. A and B are true. And then you can break that up in the world. In world W, you have A and B, therefore you have A, therefore you have B. The last thing is to drop the initial boxes. And here you just have one. It's necessary that not A, so every world has not A, so you have a contradiction. And there you go. Okay. Now, I had you do some English arguments, and you get into some pretty cool English arguments here. This first one is about the nature of lying. And this is from, this argument is from a good friend of mine, Tom Carson, who also teaches in the philosophy department. He teaches mostly ethics. And one thing he's particularly interested in is the nature of lying, what it is, and why is it wrong, and what cases it's ever right to lie, and all kinds of things like that. So the first question asks, what is lying? It isn't just when you say something false, because maybe it's an honest mistake. You're not lying, you just say something and it's wrong, but you didn't know any better. You're trying to do your best. We wouldn't call that a lie. Nor is it a lie if you say something false, but you're joking or you're play acting or something else. So if I tell you that I really love the Ohio State football team and I love when they beat Michigan, whoa, you know I'm not saying something true. I don't love that. I hate it. Okay, am I lying? Well, maybe I'm just kidding. Okay. So what exactly is lying? If you want to talk about the morality of lying, that's one of the first things you want to do. Well, one traditional definition, which seems pretty good until you think about it a little bit more, is that to lie is to knowingly assert what you take to be false while intending to deceive. So you're not just joking or an honest mistake, but you know something to be the case and you assert the opposite while intending to deceive. Is that a good definition? Well, Carson says no. Why? Well, you can think of examples where it would fail, where a person knowingly asserts what he takes to be false, but doesn't intend to deceive. How could that be? Well, he gives an example. An example is a modal argument. So, first premise. I should say that he was amazed that I found a modal argument in his work, but, well, I'm a logician. I see arguments everywhere. We're reasoning about things a whole lot, and more than you know. Your life is run by reasoning, in part. First premise, you knowingly testify falsely because of threats to your life, entails you lie. So let's say you're in court and people ask you things, but you've been threatened by people to be killed if you tell the truth. So what do? Well, let's say that you testify falsely because of threats to your life. You know it's false, but you testify that way. But the second premise says it's possible that you knowingly testify that way because of threats to your life and don't intend to deceive. Maybe, for example, you hope that no one will believe you. You lie, but you hope, you kind of wink or you say, gee, I hope people don't believe me. The conclusion from that is that you lie is consistent with you don't intend to deceive. And what is lying then? Well, you got to read Carson's stuff about this. Is this valid? Yes, it is. How do you prove it? Well, block off the conclusion, assume the opposite, not possible, L and not I. Okay, so then you reverse squiggle. So not possible, therefore necessarily false. Necessarily false, L and not I. Then what do? Well, you drop the diamond, right? So you reverse squiggles. We can star that. And then drop the diamond. It's possible. So you imagine a possible world in which it's true. So someone testifies and doesn't intend to deceive, hoping that people will not believe him. And that's in some new world W. Okay? And we can simplify that in world W, say, therefore you testify, therefore you don't intend to deceive, and then you can start that. So what have you done? Reverse squiggle, not possible, therefore necessary, not. Drop the diamond, it's possible, so it's possible, it's true in some new world. Last thing you do is drop the box. Every world has if T then L, therefore if world W have if T then L. Okay. And then this one, you got to drop also into the same world W. So not the case that you got L and not I. A couple more steps to get a contradiction. So T, if T then L, you got in the same world W. Therefore you get L and world W. And then they're not both true. L is, therefore I is not. Not I is not, so you get I. And then you get a contradiction. So the assumption now leads to a contradiction, and you conclude the opposite. Possible that you lie and don't intend to deceive, which is valid. Okay, there you go. This next one is an argument adapted from the French existentialist Jean-Paul Sartre. He stressed the importance of taking responsibility for your actions and not just saying, well, someone made me do it or something. Well, what you do, you got to take responsibility for. And he thought that what we decide is up to us, but the fact that we make decisions is utterly inescapable. We can't avoid making decisions. And this is adapted from his thinking. He didn't put it quite this precisely. Necessarily, if you don't decide, then you decide not to decide. Not D means you decide, N means you decide not to decide. That's a little tricky. So N means you decide not to decide. Okay. So let necessarily box, if you don't decide, then you decide not to decide. And let's say there's a decision that you're facing and you decide to put it off. Well, you're deciding not to decide, or you decide to follow what your mommy and daddy tell you, or your logic teacher tells you, a very foolish person to do that. Well, then you're deciding to follow what someone else says. Okay. Now, the second premise says, necessarily, if you decide not to decide, and then you decide, you are making a decision if you decide not to decide. Therefore, necessarily, if you don't decide, then you decide. Necessarily, if you don't decide, then you decide. Okay, there you go. Now, let me ask the class a question. Is there a simpler way of expressing that conclusion that you can think of? Anybody? Come on, you can answer a question. Joey, how could you say it? I think that just means necessary that you decide. Like decision is inescapable. We are condemned to be free. This decision is necessary. You've got to decide. Okay, well, thank you. Yeah, that's right. It's just the box, not box D. It's necessary you decide. So he could have written it the simpler way. Why didn't he? Well, he's French. He wants to put things with a little flair. And also, he wants to express that not deciding is a kind of deciding too. So you can't get around deciding. Okay. Is this one valid? Yeah. They're all valid so far. So assume the opposite, not necessary. If not D, then D. Okay, so this is reverse squiggle, right? Not necessary, therefore possible not. D implies D. We can star that. And then we got to drop the possible into a new world. So it's possible. This is possible. So you imagine it true in a possible world W. Not D implies D. Okay. Now the next two moves are a little tricky. So fasten your seatbelt. You got a false if then. Therefore, first part true, not D. Second part false, not D. So we get therefore not D, therefore not D. Is that right? Yeah. Actually, we don't have to write the second one because it's redundant. Why did we get this funny result? Because that's the funny conclusion. If it were the conclusion which is necessary D, it would have been a little simpler. Okay, so what do you do? So you reverse squiggles, not necessary, therefore possible not. Drop the possible into a new world. So drop diamonds. Last thing we want to do is drop both boxes into world W. So you have world W, if not D, then N, and world W, if N, then D, and a couple more steps, you have a contradiction. So D, not D implies N, therefore N, world W, and then N implies D, therefore D, and world W. So you put those two together and you get that. And then indeed you have a contradiction, therefore it is valid. And we conclude the original conclusion. Necessary that if you don't decide, then you decide. So you're responsible for what you do, even if you don't decide. You're deciding not to decide. Okay, so don't try to squirm out of responsibility for what you do. This third one is about truth and whether truth is a correspondence with the mind matching reality. And it says that it isn't. Okay, it's kind of complicated. If truth is a correspondence with the mind, then there are truths and tails. There are minds, and that's the way you translate it. And tails is just necessary if that. So you say if C, then T entails M. There are minds isn't logically necessary. We could imagine a possible world where the only thing that exists is one big rock, a mindless rock, and there are no minds. Necessarily, if there's no truth, then it's not true that there's no truth. So that would translate like that. Therefore, truth is not a correspondence with the mind. And this, again, is valid. If you block off the conclusion, you assume C, and then you can use C with the first premise to get necessary. If T, then M. And then what? Not possible M, or not necessary M, we could get, therefore, possible not M. So we reverse the squiggle. Not necessary gives you possible not. So what are we left with? A box, diamond, box, diamond, and that just is floating out there. So you put that in a new world. Possible not M, therefore impossible world W. M is false. It's necessary that if not T, then not T. So therefore in world W, if not T, then not T. Doing that one. Then we drop this in the same world. World W, you have if T, then M. And then a couple more steps to get a contradiction. So not M, T implies M, but not M, therefore not T. And then not T implies not T, therefore not T. Using this and this, it's kind of funny too. Kind of a little like the SART one. So you have contradiction, not T, not T. And so, therefore, it is valid, and you conclude the opposite. Truth is not a correspondence with the mind. What is it? Well, that's another course. Okay. 4 and 5 go together. They're about whether it's logically possible to have a perfect God and at the same time have evil in the world. Are those two consistent with each other? That there's a perfect God and yet there's evil in the world. Now, there was a famous philosopher who claims that they weren't, and that Christians and other people who speak of a perfect God and also speak of evil are simply contradicting themselves. So Christianity and Islam and Judaism and so forth are just incoherently self-contradictory. This was John Mackey, and there was quite a debate about that. This is an argument against Mackey, saying that they are compatible, but it's not a very strong argument. It starts by saying there's a perfect God, there's evil in the world, therefore the two are logically compatible with each other. Okay, kind of a very simple argument. I think it is valid. We'll prove that. I think the premises are true. Mackey would probably disagree, but I think it's a lousy argument. It commits the fallacy of begging the question. You sort of presume that they're consistent from the start without reasoning to that. Put differently, an atheist who thinks that the existence of perfect God is inconsistent with the existence of evil isn't going to accept the first premise that there's a perfect God. So you're not going to convince anyone with this at all. It assumes the opposite of the conclusion in the first premise. You wouldn't hold the first premise unless you also held that that is compatible with the existence of evil in the world. So it begs the question, are there better ways of reasoning on that? Yeah, the next one is. So this is valid, though, although it's question begging, and the proof is very simple. Assume the opposite. Not possible. G and E. Reverse squiggle, therefore necessary not. G and E. And then, well, no diamonds to drop. So what do? So we drop the box in the actual world, not both G and E. And then, but G is true, so they're not both true. The first is, therefore the second is not. You get not E. And then, indeed, you have a contradiction. So the assumption leads to a contradiction and is therefore wrong. And you conclude the opposite, the original G and E. But you're not going to convince anyone of this because the person who rejects the conclusion is going to just reject the premise that there is a perfect God. This fifth argument is a big improvement over number 4. It's from Alvin Plantinga, who is a Christian philosopher, and he wants to defend from Mackey's attack the compatibility of a perfect God with evil in the world. And this had been attacked by my favorite atheist philosopher, Mackey. Now, this is a brilliant argument that Plantinga gives, and it pretty much decided the issue. Hardly anybody takes Mackey's position anymore. Almost everyone in the philosophical community agrees that Plantinga has proven his point, that there's no radical incoherence in belief in God, belief in a perfect God, as combined with belief in evil in the world. Okay, so how does the argument go? The first premise says that there is a perfect God is compatible with T. What is T? T is a theodicy and a possible explanation of why an all-perfect God might permit the existence of evil in the world. And there's various theodicies. And you could use various ones. Here I'm using my favorite one, not Plantinga's favorite one. So why is there evil in a world created by a perfect God? Well, theodicy T, let us say, says that the world has evil because God, who is perfect, wants us to make significant free choices to struggle to bring a half-completed world toward its fulfillment. Moral evil comes from the abuse of human freedom, and physical evil from this half-completed state of the world. That's kind of complicated, and if this were philosophy or religion course, we'd talk about that, the meaning of that in greater depth. But let's just say it's an explanation of why there might be evil in a world created by a perfect God. Now, I think it's a pretty good explanation. In fact, I would assert it. However, you don't have to do that for the argument. You just have to say there is a perfect God is logically compatible with this this theodicy. In other words, you don't have to even assert that it's true. You could say, yeah, there might be objections to it, etc., 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 but it's possible that there's a perfect God, and T explains why there's evil in the world. These two fit together. They're logically consistent with each other. That's a very weak claim. And you don't have to claim that it's true, but just that it's consistent. One reason that the argument is so strong is that it says very little. It just says that there's a perfect God, and He might be true at the same time. Now, if someone's just going to disagree with that, they have to give you an argument. They say, no, you put there's a perfect God with T together, and you get a contradiction, and they've got to show that. And so far, no one's been able to show that, nor is it even very plausible. One general principle about arguments is that you have a stronger argument if you have weaker premises. What do I mean by weaker premises? That don't go out on a limb, that say the minimal to establish the conclusion. So if you're if you're a lawyer and you're giving an argument in a court of law, take the most plausible premises that say the least amount, but still establish the conclusion. You get the strongest argument that way because it's difficult to criticize the arguments then. Okay, now that's the first premise. And the second premise says T logically entails that there is evil in the world. And why does it do that? Well, because of how you formulated it. T says the world has evil because, and that entails that the world has evil. So, the second premise is not really very controversial, and it logically follows the conclusion that there's a perfect God is logically compatible with there's evil in the world. And again, this pretty much decided the issue among philosophers. There's a lot of questions about God and evil, but the logical incompatibility is not one that's currently talked about much in the literature, because people say, yeah, okay, Plantinga showed it. So it's really a nice example of a modal argument, and why it's very useful to know about modal arguments if you're going to do philosophy. Okay, let's prove that it's valid. Very straightforward proof, and kind of simple actually. Assume the opposite here, using the wrong pen. So assume not possible G and E. So then what do? You reverse squiggle. Therefore necessary not G and E. And then you drop the diamond. Up here, the first premise, it's possible that G and T So imagine a possible world W where G and T are both true. And then if you want, you can simplify that, or you can wait a little bit. I like to simplify it first. So you got possible G, possible T, and then the box things you drop in the same world. So it's necessary that if T then E. So all worlds have if T then E. And it's necessary that not both G and E. Therefore, world W has not both G and E. And then you have a little, well, okay, forget to start this one. Then you have T, T implies E, therefore E in world W, and start that. And then you have G, they're not both true, G is, therefore E is not in the same world, and then world W, and then you get a contradiction. Therefore it's valid. So now, what happens with the invalid ones? Well, you don't get a contradiction. You work the same way, assume the opposite, reverse squiggles, drop diamonds, except here you got 2 diamonds to drop, and then each one has to go into a new and different world. So you have, it's possible that it's not heads and possible that it's not tails. So imagine a possible world where it's not heads and a possible world where it's not tails. Remember, Christopher Columbus, it's possible to go to a new world. Every time you drop a possible, you imagine a different world or different story, and it's true in that scenario or that story. So you get this one, and you get this one in different worlds. And then the necessary thing you drop in both worlds here, it's heads or tails in both worlds. But then in world W, you have what? Heads or tails, but not tails, therefore heads. So you get this in world W. Now you gotta be very careful to keep it in the same world. So at least one is true, world W, but it's not T, therefore it's H. Now this one, at least one is true in world WW, but it's not H, therefore it's T. So what you end up with is no contradiction. In world W, you have not T, and in world WW, you have T, but they're different worlds, they're different stories, and so it's not a contradiction. So what do? If you can't get a contradiction, construct a refutation. So this refutation has 2 possible worlds, 2 stories, as it were, W and WW. The W one has not T and H, and the WW one has a T and not H. So imagine there's 2 possible outcomes. In one, it's heads and not tails. The other one, it's tails and not heads. So these are the 2 possibilities. And then we got to plug in the pieces and see if we make premises true and conclusion false. That one's a little tricky, but we will do it. Okay, now, so you have 2 possible worlds. One, it's heads and not tails. The other, it's tails and not heads. Now, Diamond A is true if and only if at least one world has a true. Recall possible means true in some possible world. So let's say you have possible not H. How do you evaluate that? Is not H true in at least one of the worlds? It doesn't have to be true in both of them, at least one of the worlds. Yeah, not H is true in this one. Okay, so possible not H, there you go. And box A is true if and only if all worlds have A true. So let's say necessary T. To be true, this has to be true in all worlds. It has to be true here, here. It's not true here. It is true here. But to be true, box A, necessary A, it has to be true in every world, but it's not true here, so it's false. Now, what about this one? It's necessary that heads or tails. That is true in every world because here the heads part is true, and here the tails part is true. So you have true premises and false conclusion, and therefore it's invalid. Okay. Now, these work if the formula you're evaluating starts with a box or diamonds. What if it doesn't start with a box or diamond? Well, evaluate each sub-formula that does start with a box or diamonds, and then substitute true or false for it. So suppose you have not necessary H. How do you evaluate this in these possible worlds? Well, just look at the box H, evaluate that, and then throw in the not. The box H says every world has H. Does every world has H? No, WW doesn't. So box H is false. Now false is true. There you go. So if it's complicated, it's not just box or diamond something, but you got to evaluate each part that starts with a box or diamond. How about this one? The same thing. You evaluate this and then this. At least one world has H. True. So you write true. Every world has T. False. Right? The world W doesn't have T. So you have false. And true implies false is false. And there you go. So evaluate parts starting with the box or diamond. How about this one? Not necessary H or heads or tails. Evaluate this first. Every world has heads or tails. What is it? This one has heads, this one has tails. It's true in every world, but for different reasons. So the box H or T is true, then not true is false. And there you go. This can be tricky, evaluating the premises and conclusion. But possible means true in at least one world. Necessary means true in all worlds. Okay. Okay. What do we do here? Now I want to do two more. Then I'll give you a couple to do. These are on page 245 of the book, and they're very simple ones, just to let you get the feel. So possible, therefore that A, therefore it's necessary that A, and you know that's not going to be valid. So you assume not necessary A, and so you get possible not A, reverse squiggles, and then each one of the possibles got to go into a new world. So possible A in the first premise, in world W, A is true. Possible not A in the second premise, you have not A is true in world WW. Again, you got to use a new world each time you drop a diamond. So what you end up with is no contradiction. You got A true in one world and false in another. Nothing wrong with that. So what you do is you do a galaxy of two possible worlds, W and WW. And in W you got A true, in WW you got A false. And then means it's possible A means it's true in at least one world. Is it? Yes. There you go. Possible A. So that's true. Necessary means it's true in all worlds. Is it true in all worlds? No. So you got true premises and false conclusion. Therefore, invalid. Okay, this is another one. Very simple one. A is true. Therefore, A is necessary. Not very good reasoning. So you assume the opposite. Not necessary. A. Reverse squiggle. Possible. Not A. That's a diamond. And then you drop the diamond into a new world. Not A. What can you do with A here in the actual world? Nothing. It just sits there. Do you have a contradiction? No. A is true, but might have been false. There's no contradiction there. So what you do is you again make a galaxy of two possible worlds in the actual world, and we'll indicate that by putting no W's out there. In the actual world, A is true. In world W, another possible, what might have happened, another possible scenario, A is false. So how do you evaluate that? It just says A. A is true in the actual world. It is. Therefore, A is true in every world. No, it isn't. It's not true in world W. So you get true premises and false conclusion. Therefore, invalid. Okay, I'm going to give you 3 more to do. These are from the book, page 245, and I want you to do them on paper to get a feel if you know what you're doing. And then hit pause, and then when you're ready to see how it works out, hit play, and then I'll do the proof. So right now, hit pause and do the 3. Okay, so let's do number 3 here. It's possible that A, possible that B, therefore it's possible that A and B together. This is not correct reasoning. Maybe it's possible that Michigan wins and possible that its opponent, Ohio State, wins, but maybe it's not possible that they both win together. This is not, so how do you evaluate this? You assume the opposite of the conclusion, A and B. Okay, then you reverse squiggle, so you have necessarily not A and B. So reverse squiggles, then you drop diamonds, and if you drop the first premise, therefore A is possible, therefore possible world W has A true. And then the second possible in the second premise, you want to use a new world. Every time you drop a diamond, use a new world. So you have a world where A is true, world where B is true. And then your last thing you do is drop the boxes. So every world has not both A and B. So world W has not both A and B. And world WW has not both A and B. And then world W, you have A, but they're not both true. Therefore, B is not true. And in world W, you have they're not both true, but B is. Therefore, A is not true. W. So you end up with 2 possible worlds. You have no contradiction. A is true in W and false in WW, but they're different stories. They might vary on what's true or false. So the refutation has 2 possible worlds. World W, where you have A true and B false. And world WW, where you have B true and A false. And then you evaluate the premises and conclusion. Possible A means A is true in at least one world. Is it? Yes, it's true in world W. So the first premise is true. Possible B means B is true in at least one world, which it is in WW. Therefore, possible A and B together. It means there's one world where you have A and B both true. You don't have it here, you don't have it here. You don't have it anywhere. So there's a world with A and a world with B, but there's no world with A and B together. So you have false conclusion, and therefore invalid. You have true premises and false conclusion. There you go. Okay, here's another example. Block off the conclusion, assume the opposite, not necessary, not A. Then reverse squiggles. So you have possible A, and then you could dump that in a new world. World W, you have A true. And then this necessary thing, you got to put in the possible world W and also in the actual world because you got something unmodalized there. So this is true in every world. Therefore, it's true in world W. If A, then not B. And it's true in the actual world. If A, then not B. And that's very important to do because your refutation isn't going to work otherwise. So in world W, you have A true, A implies not B, therefore not B. And then in the actual world, you have A implies not B, but B, therefore, therefore not A. Okay, so then you end up, you have no contradiction again. You got A true in world W, but false in the actual world. So what do? Well, again, you have two worlds. In the actual world, you have B true and A false. So these are in lines without W worlds. And then in world W, you have A true and B false. So A true and B false. So, okay, so these are in the actual world, these are in world W. Every world, if you have A, then you have not B. Here you have, so if A, then not B. Is that true in this first world? Yeah, because A is false. False implies anything is true. And here you have A implies not B, and A is true, and B is false, not B is true. So you have true implies true is true. So this is true in both worlds. So it's true in all worlds, so it's true. B, you just look to the actual world because it doesn't have boxes or diamonds, and that's true. And then the last one, all worlds have not A, false. This one doesn't, has A. So you have true premises and false conclusion, therefore invalid. Okay. Now, this one is a little tricky. Assume the opposite. Not necessary. If A, then B. Therefore, possible. Not if A, then B. And then you drop that in a new world. You have not if A, then B. And then you have false if then, therefore in world W. First part true, world W. Second part false. And then what do we do with this first one here? Well, you can only drop an initial diamond. So, or box. So if you had box A, you could infer something, or not box B, but you can't do anything with that. But you got to do something, so what do? You break it. Right, you're frustrated, so you break it and make another assumption. Let's say you assume not necessary A, and then you get possible not A, and then you get world W. W, again, you drop a diamond, you got to use a new world. W, W, not A. And then you get no contradiction. Again, you get A true in one world and B and A false in another, but that's okay. So again, you end up with a galaxy of two possible worlds. World W, you have A true and B false. And world W, you got A false. So, how do you evaluate it? Well, got an if-then here. Evaluate the first part. Necessary A means all worlds have A. Is that true? No. No. So box A is false. False implies anything is true. Doesn't much matter what the second part is. And then this world says, in every world, if you have A, then you have B. So if A, then B is true in every world. But it's not true in this first world W. It's true implies false. It's false. So can you have true premises and false conclusion? Yeah. Under these conditions, that's what you get, and so it is invalid. So for homework, do a few more translations and English problems 1 to 4 on page 245. Being sure to do the ambiguous arguments both ways. Ambiguous, if A, then it must be that B. You know that, okay. It's like two different problems. Logical, continue with the valid one. Or if you're brave, try the invalid one. If you're a little unsure of that, it's more important that you master the valid one first. But if you feel good about the invalid ones, you can do it now, not put it off. And in Logicola, type W, not A, for example, to put not A in world W.